morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Technical Redistricting Academy, presented by the Orange County Registrar of Voters. I'm the moderator, Rebecca Lee, and also the Training and Special Projects Manager here at the Registrar of Voters. This is our second and last session in our Redistricting Academy, and today we'll be focusing on the data and resources involved during the redistricting process. If you missed session 1, where we address the fundamentals of redistricting and the role of the Registrar of Voters in redistricting, you can visit our website at ocvote.com/academy to watch the presentation or also download the slide deck. Before we begin, I do want to go over some of our housekeeping notes. The session today will consist of 2 parts, each part a little less than an hour with a combined Q&A session at the end. You may have noticed, but upon entry, you have been muted, and we ask that you keep your mic off so that we avoid any sound issues. We have quite a sizable audience, expecting upwards of around 100 participants. So we will have to moderate the questions that we receive. So please use the chat function. I will receive those questions that you send in, and we will present them to the panelists at the end of our presentations today. If there are any remaining questions that we don't have time to cover, I will send them to the panelists following the session and route them back to the asker. And please note that this session is being recorded, and similar to session 1, it will be posted on our website for you to view following the session. Next, I also want to mention that we do have tech support available. If you have any issues during the meeting, or you have a colleague who is trying to join and is unable to get into the meeting, please call 1-866-680-2423, and someone will be able to assist you with basic troubleshooting. We'll also be providing this number in the chat box, so you can also copy it and paste the information from the chat window. All right. And so just a quick recap of what our Technical Redistricting Academy is. The Technical Redistricting Academy is designed to introduce attendees to the local redistricting process as it relates to the Orange County Registrar of Voters. Please note that this educational series is produced by our office, but it does not support the actual boundary changes for any specific jurisdiction, nor does it serve as a forum for the solicitation of input regarding any jurisdiction's redistricting process. Participants are advised that to take this information not as a substitute for legal counsel, and you're encouraged to contact your jurisdictions for the redistricting process that you're interested in, and contact them for if you wish to be involved. Questions or comments regarding the county's redistricting efforts for the supervisorial districts may be sent to redistricting@ocgov.com. And with that, I will turn the session over to our guest speaker, Deborah Depp from the Center of Demographic Research at the Cal State University Fullerton. In part 1 of today's session, Deborah and I will be actually splitting the time to talk about the different resources available and stay involved and how to stay involved throughout the redistricting process, and also talking a little bit about the resources available here at the Registrar of Voters office. And with that, Deborah, please take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen, get this going. Okay, I think we have a title slide, yes?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Depp, and I am the Director of the Center for Demographic Research at Cal State Fullerton. The purpose of today's presentation is to give people an idea of various data sources that are out there, and specifically some that are used in redistricting, that these sources are available publicly and they are just out there and exist. I'm not going to go into depth about how to process or find specific data sets. This is to give people an idea of what is out there and where it's at. It's what I call not a need to know, but a need to know where to find. I include an acronym list in every presentation because there are so many in my line of work, and it seems like everyone uses them in one way or another. I will try not to use them too much, but they are here for reference, and when the presentation gets posted, you'll have them as well. So why am I here? What is CDR? I don't expect anyone to know who or what CDR is, so just a little bit of background. CDR was established in 1996 to fill a void after the County of Orange bankruptcy in the mid-90s. Before the bankruptcy, there was a group within the county called the Forecast and Analysis Center under the then CAO's office. This group produced the demographic data and growth forecasts for all of Orange County, but the whole group was eliminated after the county bankruptcy. Without that group, no one was producing the countywide growth forecast or population estimates used in local and regional planning. And so multiple agencies throughout the county and many departments within the county government that used and needed that data decided to pool their money together to reinstate those products. Through a series of events, the CDR was created at Cal State Fullerton, and we now perform most of the functions the county used to perform. This includes some of the functions related to the Census Bureau and the decennial census data programs. These agencies I mentioned before, they're what we call our sponsors. The agencies have changed over time, but we now have 10 agencies that provide the funding for our annual work program. We are, of course, hosted by Cal State Fullerton. We also have the Transportation Authority and the toll roads, the County of Orange, the Sanitation District, the 2 water districts. All 34 cities contribute and participate through the Orange County Council of Governments, or OCROV. The Southern California Association of Governments is a regional planning body, and the Orange County Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, is a contributing partner. So what is redistricting and why are we talking about this? One of the first things to clarify is the difference between apportionment and redistricting. Apportionment is the process of determining the number of representatives in Congress. Each state's representation in the U.S. House of Representatives is based on the decennial census data. Per the U.S. Constitution, apportionment of the House of Representatives is determined by the national census once every 10 years, otherwise known as the decennial census. The Census Bureau is supposed to deliver apportionment results to the President and Congress by December 31st of the census year. That deadline was December 31st, 2020, and I think everyone knows that the deadline was missed. What is redistricting? Redistricting is the redrawing of boundaries for areas used to determine where people elect their representatives, such as the U.S. House of Representatives, the state legislature, cities and counties, and agencies such as school districts and water districts. Public Law 94171 requires the redistricting data collected and reported by the U.S. Census Bureau to be delivered to state officials within 1 year of Census Day or no later than April 1st. Again, we all know this deadline was missed. So what's the difference in the data for these two processes? Congressional apportionment uses state level data and includes residential population plus the federally affiliated count overseas, which is typically military. Only total population is reported for apportionment, which again was supposed to be released on December 31st, 2020, but was actually released on April 26, 2021, due to delays caused by the COVID pandemic and related shutdowns. On the other hand, redistricting data is published in the Public Law, or PL 94171 redistricting data file. This file contains data down to what is called the census block level, which can be aggregated up to cities, counties, the states, and other geographic areas. And this is the biggest difference between the two and why we can't start drawing maps with the census data just yet. It's because the apportionment data that is out now is only at the state level, and redistricting requires the block level data. In redistricting, it's the residential population that is counted and used. It also includes demographic information such as race and ethnicity, and a couple select housing characteristics. This data is officially going to be released on the Census Bureau's public data portal, data.census.gov, by September 30th, 2021. The data is also officially transmitted to the states on DVDs and flash drives to process and disseminate for people to use. A little later, I will explain more about the August 16th date and the legacy format. To provide a bit more context on the data itself, you will hear some terminology that are unique to the Census Bureau's data sets. The smallest level of geography that the data is released at is called the census block. This is not necessarily a city block, but there are criteria that are used to determine each of their geographies. Blocks, if drawn correctly, are only assigned to one jurisdiction, city, or community. In census terminology, these are called census places. Census blocks are grouped together into census block groups, easy enough to remember. And block groups are grouped together, or what we call nest, into census tracts. These are tracts with a CT, think tractor, not racetrack. Tracts nest into counties, but they don't usually nest into cities or CDPs. Because blocks are only assigned to one place, you can also have partial block groups or partial census tracts, which are block groups or tracts that have a part in one or more cities or census places. For spatial context, this is a map of the 2020 census places. We have 34 incorporated cities in the county, plus we now have 11 census designated places, or CDPs for short. These are areas in the unincorporated part of each county, but have known or definite boundaries and identifiers. In Orange County, we have 5 newly designated CDPs. These are Silverado, Williams Canyon, Majeska, Trabuco Canyon, and Rancho Mission Viejo. We also have 6 carried over from the last census: Coto de Caza, here, Las Flores, Ladera Ranch, North Tustin, Midway City, not actually a city even though it's in the name, and Rossboro. Again, for context, here we have the same 34 cities plus the 11 census designated places. And sometimes, yes, the city boundaries do extend out into the ocean. There are 614 census tracts in the county. One happens to be just the ocean. And we also have another special census tract in the county that is just for Disneyland. The census started doing more of these special use tracts a decade ago. The tracts are split into 2,049 block groups in Orange County. And the block groups are split into 26,734 census blocks. This is the geographic level the redistricting data file is released at. And really, this is just to give you an idea of the level of geographic detail and the size of the data sets that we're looking at. And how this relates to elections and linking back to the Registrar of Voters, the host of this Redistricting Academy, Orange County has about 1,800 voting precincts. The Census Bureau has its own redistricting data program and website. I mentioned previously there is a prescribed data set to be used in redistricting called the Public Law 94171 Redistricting Data File. Though the data isn't out yet, status and more information about the data and program are linked here. There are also linked pages from that site that have additional background information on their program. So what's actually in the file? When the actual data comes out, there are multiple data points or variables that will be included. Total population includes both people living in some type of housing unit, and the group quarters population includes those living in other types of facilities. They have this information by race for the total population. Then they break out the data by ethnicity, identifying those that are Hispanic or Latino of any race, and then race categories that are not Hispanic or Latino origin. There's also the population aged 18 years and over, because that's the population that's of age and eligible to vote. And they break this out again by race only, and then also by ethnicity. Housing unit counts are also included. This includes both vacant and occupied housing units. The group quarters population is a subset of the total population. If anyone wanted just the household population, one would subtract the group quarters from the total population, and you would get the household population. The racial categories that are included are white, Black or African American, American Indian and Alaska Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, some other race, and combinations of 2 or more races up to a combination of 6 races. The reporting of ethnicity is Hispanic or Latino of any race. For the group quarters population, they also break out these by type. There are those living in institutionalized facilities, such as correctional facilities for adults, juvenile facilities, nursing and other institutional facilities, and then non-institutionalized facilities like college and university student housing and military quarters. More data and other data. The Census Bureau doesn't have just the redistricting data set and information on race and housing units. They have a tremendous amount of information about all kinds of things on their website called data.census.gov. You can find data on other things like income, single parent households, persons with disabilities, number of families below the poverty line, languages spoken at home. There's a tremendous amount of information. This data is available at a wide range of geographic levels, some of the ones I mentioned before, but most commonly down to the block group level. I recommend the advanced search link because it allows you to specify the geographic level and years of data that you're looking for. There are plenty of free webinars on the website, and a link is provided to their training and webinar site. Why do we mention all this other data when talking about redistricting? Maybe someone is looking for a particular community of interest and wants to see where these populations are located, or they just want to explore data. A lot of this is just knowing the information is often out there and it's free to access. Another data file that is used as supplemental data in redistricting and is required to be reported out for proposed maps in some efforts in California is called the CVAP data. This stands for Citizen Voting Age Population, or the population that is eligible to vote. This data is now published by the US Census Bureau and is calculated on a 5-year rolling average and published at the census block group level. The data comes from the monthly survey from the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey, or ACS. They survey about 250,000 households every month across the nation. And from that data, the Bureau estimates the population by race ethnicity that are US citizens aged 18 or older. Again, those that are eligible to vote. Beyond the Census Bureau, there are sources of information and demographic data. The California Department of Finance has a subgroup called the State Census Data Center. This group is the link between the Federal Census Bureau and the states. The Bureau works with the state data centers to disseminate all sorts of data in addition to the decennial census data. They have current and historical data and can assist others in their research. The SCDC also has affiliate centers all over the state to assist with data information and dissemination. My group, the CDR, is one of those affiliate centers. The state has its own 2020 census website as well. And when the legacy format data comes out, they're going to process the data and post the California data online to make it easier for people to get at and use. Their webpage also includes a timeline, and it is a quick reference page for census data for California. The Statewide Database. This group is responsible for collecting and processing data for California's redistricting efforts. Their data is used for Assembly, Senate, Congressional, Board of Equalization, and local redistrictings as mandated by law. Their data collection and processing is ongoing between redistrictings and with precinct level data sets and resources published after each election. They publish these in table and data formats compatible with mapping software, also known as GIS or Geographic Information Systems. Why this group is becoming more known is because they are responsible for modifying the decennial census redistricting data file by redistributing the incarcerated persons in California to their last known California address if that is available. Once the legacy format public law file comes out, which should be released by mid-August, that file will be processed by the state, and it will take the statewide database about 30 days to process and redistribute the incarcerated persons. That redistributed file is what is required to be used in certain California redistricting efforts, such as city councils and boards of supervisors. Beyond these, there are many other data sites and sources. A couple that are free to use are ESRI's Living Atlas of the World, formerly known as ESRI, now ESRI. Data here comes from various sources, including Census Bureau data, and you can view these in online maps. NHGIS has data for all over the US and the decennial census data going back for decades. You have to register, but it's free and they allow you to download the data. All they ask is that you source them if you use what you download. The County of Orange also has what's called an open GIS data site. You can download all sorts of geographic information for Orange County, and they also have demographic data for areas within the county as well. On our website at CDR, we have a whole page dedicated to links to all sorts of data and mapping websites, including these I just mentioned. So we're waiting for data to really get into redistricting and start drawing maps. The apportionment data, which contains the state level totals, were released on April 26th. These were 4 months late because of the delays caused by the COVID pandemic and economic shutdowns. The Census Bureau typically releases the redistricting public law data about 4 months after that, but it's a domino effect, and they have to get through one process before moving on to the next. So we got the state level apportionment data in late April, and the Bureau heard all the complaints that the redistricting data was going to be so late that the states and localities were running into statutory deadlines and wouldn't be able to complete redistricting on time. So the Bureau went back and figured out that they will have to, they have what's called the legacy format of the redistricting data file. These are text-based files that have to be joined together and processed, but these are the same source data that the Bureau is going to use to populate their data.census.gov website by the end of September. Since it's actually the same data, the Bureau decided to publish the legacy format data, which will be ready about 6 weeks earlier, so that those that have the data skills could get a head start. The state of California, CDR, and many others will be processing the legacy format data so we can get that 6-week head start as well. But again, for redistricting, using the county boards of supervisors as an example, they're waiting for the redistributed incarcerated population data set that will be available about 30 days after the public law file is released. By the time the public law data set officially comes out on the Census Bureau's data.census.gov site in its easy to use format, the statewide database should be done with their part, and the folks should be able to have the official redistricting files ready to use by the end of September, assuming all goes according to the plan. A couple more things. When we actually do get the data and people can start to draw maps for whatever agency they're interested in, the #1 goal is that the districts or divisions, as they're called for water districts, or trustee areas for school districts. The primary goal of redistricting is to have the population for each of the board districts be as nearly equal in population as possible. Now, there are additional criteria that can be considered, and statute sets forth an order of priority for some agencies, which are used to justify why the population totals may not be exactly the same. How do we know what the population should be for each of the board districts, divisions, or trustee areas? Well, you start with the total population of the agency from the decennial census. For example, if that population is 500,000, you divide that number by the number of board members, 5 in the case of the county, and the target population would be 100,000 for each district. Now, it is not always possible to hit that number exactly. So as you develop district plans, you look to see what the difference is for each of the proposed districts with the target district population. The population spread between the smallest and largest districts needs to be less than 10%. Let me show you an example. In the same case where the total population is 500,000 and the target population is 100,000, a person creates a proposed map plan with 5 districts and population totals such as these. District 1 is 104,200, which is 4,200 above the target population, or 4.2% above the target district population. District 2 is a little under, so are districts 4 and 5, and District 3 is a little over. I'm showing that same sample data in a graph because I think it's easier to understand. You want to look at the population spread between the largest and the smallest districts. In this example, the smallest district, District 2, is 4% lower than the target population. The largest district is District 3 at 4.8% above the target population. Then what you do is you take the absolute value of the lowest and highest proposed districts and add them together, and you get a total spread of 8.8%. This is less than the 10% threshold, which is generally deemed acceptable, but again, other factors will be considered. Luckily, the software programs usually calculate this and will tell you if you exceed the 10% threshold. Beyond the criteria spelled out in statute and another plug for last week's Redistricting Academy session, there are other things that may be considered in drawing district boundaries. These are natural or built features such as freeways, roads, rivers, hills, and mountains, cities and neighborhoods, special districts, school attendance boundaries, things like special zones or district subareas like entertainment zones, downtowns, college campuses, and surrounding areas and historical neighborhoods, or areas with similar or common interests, issues, or socioeconomic characteristics, such as legislative, education, or housing. Some of these can be referenced by using the data.census.gov website. To find out more about various redistricting efforts, visit agency redistricting websites and get on email distribution lists. Here are links to the 2020 California Citizens Redistricting Commission, the County of Orange's redistricting website and their dedicated email address for comments or distribution list requests, the Orange County Registrar of Voters, which will also have links to postings of this academy and the presentations. Counties, cities, school districts, and special districts will also have web pages for their own efforts. And if you're interested in redistricting outside of California, there are resources such as the National Conference of State Legislatures, who have a website and ongoing seminars with all things redistricting. So again, just a brief overview. And now that you know about various data sources that are used to draw maps, once those maps are drawn and a board approves or adopts a new map for their boards or councils, that information has to be transmitted to the County Registrar of Voters to implement for the next election. And so I'm going to turn it back, stop sharing and turn it back over to Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for that presentation and providing all that useful information. I know that your presentation had a lot of links embedded into those slides. And so for the participants in our session today, please note that all of our slides will be posted on our website. So if there were any links that you wanted to save, don't worry, we'll have them up and then you can copy and paste them and use them as you prepare for your redistricting. So I'll go ahead and begin sharing my screen. All right. So before we jump into part 2, I did want to wrap up a little bit on part 1 about the other available resources, particularly the ones that are available through our office here at the Registrar of Voters. AB 849, we talked about this a little bit in our first session. It's also known as the Fair Maps Act, and it was passed to improve and standardize the local redistricting process and to really help incorporate best practices that California was already using in their Citizens Redistricting Commission. And this really allowed local governments, specifically at the county and city level, to have clearer guidelines on how they should draw and redistrict in order to ensure fairness and prohibit gerrymandering. The Fair Maps Act also created public outreach and transparency requirements that required all communities to know about how they can actually be really involved in the drawing of their city or county's district lines. And one of these requirements was for the Secretary of State to actually provide resources for the county and the cities to use. So as it's noted on the slide, the Secretary of State actually has internet templates explaining the county and redistricting process. And these templates are also offered in any of the languages that may be required by your county or your city. And that's all accessible using the link on the screen here. If you go to the Secretary of State's website, we'll also post it in the chat so that you have access to that resource. Once you're on the Secretary of State's website, you'll be able to note that there are different templates to use for different types of redistricting. So if you have a city council redistricting, there are templates in English, Spanish, and several other languages. If your city has a redistricting commission, there's a different template for that. And likewise with the County Board of Supervisors and County Redistricting Commissions as well. On the same website, you can also learn that the Fair Maps Act requires the Secretary of State to post the applicable languages for each city. And this really means that if your city has a percentage of the population who speaks another language, the Secretary of State is supposed to provide a template in that language so that the community can remain engaged. And likewise, on that same website, you'll be able to access the files that the Secretary of State has produced in either an Excel or PDF format. And as you can see here, this is just a little snippet of that file you can download. You'll be able to see the city and the languages that are required for those cities. All right. And in session 1, we talked a little bit about how the Registrar of Voters plays a role, and specifically how it relates to ballot types and how the ballots are actually created from the maps that are submitted. It's important to remember that the Registrar of Voters does not oversee or facilitate the redistricting process, but we do have available resources that may be helpful for you to use as you look to become engaged in the process. Our Maps department actually manages our agency's addresses and precinct and provides a range of different mapping and data products for the public. We use an address verification process to check all of our addresses against other resources. And so that might be with the assessor's office, sheriff, parcels. We're using all different types of resources to make sure that the address we have are verified. And in an election cycle, our office conducts monthly, weekly checks to make sure that all the addresses that we have are coded correctly. And this process is particularly critical because we are sending our ballots to 1.8 million voters in the county. Now, if you joined us in session 1, you may recall this slide. I just pulled it from our previous session. And in 2016, our GIS team began a process to modernize all of our voter addresses by geocoding them and verifying the locations of the addresses. And for those of you who may not be familiar with geocoding, geocoding is a process of transforming a description of a location, such as like a pair of coordinates, and we are pinpointing them to a location on the Earth's surface. So this allows us to map out all the addresses we have with pinpoint accuracy. And as you can see here, they are dotted accurately. And this allows us to ensure that all of the voters and candidates are placed in the right precinct. Now, in the past, the list of voter addresses was managed on paper reports, and it could take months to review to ensure that all of the addresses were verified. But by cross-checking the voter addresses with the addresses maintained by perhaps the water department or the assessor's office, among other records, our office can ensure that the addresses we have are both valid and correct. Now, the work that we do to geocode our addresses obviously improves our efficiencies when we eventually receive the district maps from cities or the county, but it can also be requested and used by the public as a resource. So if you visit our website, the link is up here and we'll also put it in the chat. If you visit our website, you can place a map request to order a map online, but they can also be ordered in our office over the counter, by email, or even over the phone. Anyone can request this data. The requester is expected to complete a form. Here's a little bit, a small snippet of what that form may look like. And depending on the type of form is requested or map is requested, there may be a small fee associated with it. But using and understanding the current maps can really help you prepare for redistricting. Again, there are several options for different maps you can include and request for from our office. Some maps readily available for public use include city boundaries, congressional districts, state senate and assembly districts, supervisorial districts, and the school and college districts. So that wraps up our part 1 of our session. We will be jumping straight into part 2. But if you have any questions, please drop them down in the chat below. We are monitoring all the questions that we are receiving, and we want to make sure that we leave plenty of time at the end of our session to answer the questions that you may have. All right. So now that we learned a little bit about the different resources available, I would now want to kind of talk about first a recap of session 1 and what we talked about there and how that applies to our session right now when we're talking about file preparation for those maps that you bring to us. In session 1 of our academy, we had a quick crash course on redistricting. What is it, why does it matter, and what role does the Registrar of Voters play? Again, if you missed session 1, you can view the presentations on our website. But part 1 of session 1 discussed specifically the technicalities and the changes in the redistricting process since 2011 and the legal requirements as well. Part 2 discussed the process of how those completed maps become ballots for the voters and really focused on the role that the Registrar of Voters plays and how important that is in this process. But again, to understand the best practices we have to share on the redistricting process, it's really important to understand those fundamentals of redistricting. So as an example, tip 1 is just a reminder to consider the timelines that you're working against. As you've heard repeatedly by now, Census data has been delayed due to the pandemic. And in a normal cycle, redistricting committees, local governments and election offices would generally have several more months to work on redistricting, but now that's been limited to a number of weeks from one team to another. And the US Census Bureau plans to, again, release this data by the end of September, but that does cut back on the time that we have. But it's important to note that redistricting timelines differ, but there's also several things that you can begin taking action on now. So first, to talk a little bit about the timelines, the County of Orange has its next elections in the June 7th, 2022 statewide primary election. And this means that the redistricting deadline is coming up on December 2021. For charter and general cities, their next elections will occur in November 2022. So their deadline is not until E-205, which lands on April 17th. For schools and community college districts, they're also targeting that November 8th. However, their requirements for their redistricting deadline is a little bit different, and their maps have to be completed before March 1st, meaning their deadline falls on December 28th, or sorry, February 28th. And for special districts, their elections will be again in November, and the redistricting deadlines are a little bit different for special districts, and it's on E-180, landing on May 7th. Again, once the maps are adopted by the redistricting deadline, again, different for the different types of districts, it's important to turn those maps over to the Registrar of Voters immediately, because we need to get those maps in order to produce those ballots. And if you want to learn, again, a little bit more on how those maps actually become ballots, please revisit session 1, where we talked about that process. All right, so tip 2 is to consider the requirements. Again, we covered a lot of these in session 1 of our Redistricting Academy, but it's important to remember the process and procedures of redistricting have changed dramatically since 2011. So remember to consider the new requirements if there have been changes for your district. And even though, again, the census data is late, redistricting starts now, and several different agencies have already started in that process. And so it begins with building your team, building your knowledge base, and attending academies such as the one that we've provided to just understand how redistricting works. And you can also begin by preparing for public hearings and engagement. Again, AB 849 made changes so that it would be easier for the community to get involved in the process. But this means that there are different requirements for public hearings, map publications, and public engagement. And so for public hearings, it's important to understand how many hearings are required and when they must occur. Again, the exact differences can be found in the bill text, but it was also covered by Nicole and Mark from County Counsel in our first session. Likewise, with map publications, it's also important to consider when they need to be posted and where. And when you're engaging with the public, make sure you're considering who you're engaging with and how you're engaging with them. If you're a city and or county, again, there are language requirements to consider, and make sure that you remember that you have the resources available on the Secretary of State's website to help you, especially those different templates that you can use. Any additional details on these requirements can be found in the slide deck from session 1 in an excellent presentation prepared by Nicole and Mark. But again, remember to seek legal counsel for all requirements. Now, for the maps themselves, you should consider the following criteria. For the maps, there is a ranked priority. Number 3 is actually unique to counties only, but 1, 2, 4, and 5 apply to both counties and cities. So 1, make sure you're considering geographic contiguity. Does each district have a single unbroken border? For neighborhoods and communities of interest, are those neighborhoods and communities of interest kept whole, intact within the same district? For 3, again, this applies to the counties, for noting whether the cities and census designated places remain intact, and are they kept whole and divided as little as possible if they must be divided. 4 is those easily identifiable boundaries, and ensuring that, asking yourselves, do these districts follow easily identifiable and natural boundaries, such as streets, rivers, highways, and rail lines. And 5, geographical compactness. Are the districts relatively compact? And again, the ROV doesn't support the actual boundary changes for specific jurisdictions, but we do want to make sure that as you prepare, that you are considering these criteria when you're preparing your maps. Tip 3 is to consider the geographic features and the topography. To guide where the lines should be drawn, make sure you're paying attention to those freeways, rivers, lakes, hills, and major streets, and also consider the boundaries of gated communities. There have been instances where lines were drawn through homes or apartment complexes, and as a best practice, avoid this and make sure to follow those major streets. Here's an example, actually. It's a little bit small on the screen, but it's an example from North Carolina, I believe, where a congressional district actually cut through a home. So you can see the roof of a home right here, and you can see that the line just cut through the home. And this was an interesting scenario, and I heard that they actually had to see, and they were wondering, do we ask what room the voters are in? If there's multiple voters, are they in different rooms? Does that mean that they get different ballots? And looking at all of those different requirements. In 2020, there have been already adjustments made so that the census block will be brought out, and it will make sense to follow the natural lines rather than just drawing a line and cutting a home. And so make sure that that doesn't happen in your process as you are engaged in the redistricting process. Make sure to look out for any of these errors. It may not be intentional, but make sure that you're avoiding any of these unnecessary errors. All right, and finally for tip 4, we do ask that you consider the file delivery. It's really critical that we have a timely submission of shape files to the Registrar of Voters office. And it's really critical that we have this for the next stage of redistricting when we're converting these maps into ballot types for our voters. Generally, it's most common for us to receive the files from different districts as shape files in email. So make sure that we receive those in a timely manner. Again, timely submission is critical for the next stage of the redistricting process. The state and county are already engaged in redistricting, but the cities, schools, and special districts should prepare as soon as possible to make sure that they begin the redistricting as they can already get engaged with public hearings or preparing and building a team. And again, as a reminder, make sure to share those lines with our office as soon as they are adopted. If you want more information, make sure that you check out the state's redistricting website. There's also a county redistricting website. And if you're interested in the websites for your city, community, college, or school district, you can visit the local agency websites for information as well. All right, and we will now go into our questions. So again, if you've had any questions, make sure to submit them. And we will go ahead and start taking a look. For our questions today, we will have Justin Berardino, our operations manager at the Registrar of Voters office, and Deborah Depp to answer some of the questions that we've received. Okay, so I do have one question. It was from Kirk. I believe you asked this question a few minutes ago, so we may need to ask a little bit more detail. But the question was, is there any research proving this approach is more equitable? When you were referring to this approach, could you clarify what you meant by this approach? I'm not sure exactly at which point you sent that message. Kirk, if you're still on the call, if you could please clarify your question in the chat. Okay. And the clarification was any research evidence that this law is more equitable. Let's see. Kirk, do you recall which slide you were referring to? Were you talking about AB 849, the changes made there to see if it has since been made a better redistricting process? So AB 849, while we're waiting for any additional clarification, it was passed in 2019. So this will actually be the first redistricting process in which it will be used with all of the new criteria. So definitely it was enhanced to make sure that the different communities and counties and cities really had a better way and a better guideline for how they should engage with the public and make sure that they make the districts as equitable as possible. Again, I don't really have evidence at the moment to say that this is indeed more equitable, but there definitely are more guidelines in place to help with this process. And we are still receiving other questions. I haven't seen any other questions received. All right, let me check in with my co-host in just a moment.
Rebecca, you're on mute.
Thank you. So it looks like we haven't received any other questions. I just checked in with my co-host to see if she received any as a direct message, but it looks like that was all the questions that we have today. Our session did end a little bit earlier. We will stay on until at least 11 to see if any other questions are received, but thank you again for joining us today. We hope that these past two sessions have been very informative to you and you were able to take away a little bit more on how to approach redistricting from what is redistricting to finally preparing the files for delivery. All right, and thank you again. It looks like we did actually receive one other question. So maybe Deborah, if you are available to answer this one. So the question is, how can you clarify the time when the data that is collected for incarcerated population should be available?
So we're going off the legacy-based format timeline, and that is supposed to be released by August 16th. So the latest news from the Census Bureau is that they're on target to release the data by August 16th, which is a Monday. I understand that they're going to have some sort of press conference or training session webinar that's going to be the Friday prior to that. So it looks like maybe they're going to release it over the weekend, but the legacy format should be out closer to that August 16th deadline. With that, it's going to be 4 text-based files plus a geographic file. Those need to be sorted through, merged, teased out for the different geographic data sets that need to be used. And that process is probably going to take about a week. The state data center and state DOF have said their goal is to have, once the legacy data format is released, they want to post that and have it processed on their website and ready to use about a week after that. And then once that happens, the statewide database has said that they need 30 days after that date to finish their redistribution of the incarcerated population. So basically, whatever date the legacy format data comes out, add a week or 7 days, and then add 30 days. So about 37 days or so after the legacy format data is released, we expect to have the actual redistricting data file that contains the redistributed incarcerated population. We can't give any more definite timeline on that because we don't have it. It's more of a just stay posted. As soon as that data gets released, the Census Bureau, it should be in the news and folks should know. And then all the links in our presentation, even the county redistricting website has the links to those timelines and such. Those should be posted, but right now we're estimating about 37 days after the legacy data is released.
Thank you, Deborah, for that answer. We actually received another question. The question is, does the ROV make any suggestions during the redistricting process? For example, the line running through the middle of a complex, do you suggest that it be moved? Justin, would you be able to answer this question?
I think there's two parts to the answer of that question. Number one is part of the reason we're having this meeting ahead of time is to let you know, please try to avoid that. So, once the boundaries are adopted, it makes it a lot more difficult for us to figure out, which house is supposed to go in this district or if it's supposed to go in this other district. So we're really trying to prevent that from happening ahead of time. Part 2 to that is, if that does happen, let's say it happened inadvertently and the lines were adopted, we'll go back to the district and then ask, what was your intent? Was this house or, some other situations that come up are, it'll go through a mobile home park that has one street address. And so we don't know which homes are which and which are supposed to be on this side of the boundary and that side of the boundary. So what we'll end up doing is going back to you and saying, hey, you tell us. So, but the best thing is to just look at that up front so that everybody, when they adopt the boundaries, they have a clear idea of, what parcels or what properties are supposed to be in which district.
And Justin, if I can add to that, the redistricting data file, those maps that I showed with the census blocks, those are the geographies that are supposed to be used to build whatever districts or divisions or trustee areas during redistricting. So the Census Bureau, decades ago, they started drawing these maps and census geographies by paper. And starting in the mid-2000s, they really tried to make a concerted effort working with staff of their own, plus agency staff for all levels of government across the nation. CDR assisted with it as well. in making those boundaries spatially accurate. So that issue that happened out east, that doesn't happen where you're cutting through houses and things like that. So the census blocks are not supposed to cut through any types of structures. They're supposed to follow natural features or rivers or streets or things like that, or extend past the end of a cul-de-sac. So they've made a real huge effort since the mid-2000s. There are still errors, we know that, but when anybody finds those in one way or another, the Census Bureau actually wants to know if those issues do arise so they can make corrections. So agencies, when they're creating, again, they're doing their redistricting, they're supposed to use the census blocks as the geographic building block to create those districts, because those have the population counts. You're not supposed to just draw an arbitrary line cutting a census block, but agreed with Justin that sometimes a census block may cut through, let's say, a mobile home park or a neighborhood or something like that. And that's why it's really important that whenever possible to either submit a detailed map to the ROV or preferentially submit the geographic shape files so that they can import that information into their system and then look and see where those addresses are lining up. Unfortunately, the Census Bureau does not use parcel boundaries to build their geographic files. Again, they're improving over time, but hopefully nobody's just drawing arbitrary lines. They're using those actual census blocks to build the districts, divisions, trustee areas, so that those have reference files that can be used by ROV and others to know which district is where.
But it does still happen, so.
Yeah.
It does still happen,
either,
right? It does still happen.
Either try to prevent it ahead of time or just be responsive when we, ask for clarification.
Yeah. And the geographic files, even though there's no data, the geographic files are available on the census website. CDR also has them, the GIS files. So you can download them again from CDR or for Orange County only, and then from the census website. So if folks want to play around with those and they have that kind of GIS software to look at, then you can see where those boundaries would be.
Right. Thank you both for that answer. All right, we actually did receive one other question. Maybe Justin, you could answer this one. Would you use prior voter history or demographics in helping to determine redistricting boundaries?
That actually wouldn't be a question for the ROV. That's for the jurisdictions who are doing the redistricting. But
right.
maybe something to say to that we do sell voter data. That's when I think Deborah mentioned that earlier and mentioned all the different data sources, but we do have voter data with voter history and so forth that you can purchase from our office.
Yes, that is, I think I mentioned that. And then also the statewide database has election information for all of California as well. But there is, even though I'll reference something, but the disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, that there is part of the election code. One of the modifications that was made was that you're not supposed to use information to favor or discriminate against a political party. So there is a fine line, I guess, of working with some of the voter registration or actual election information. But yeah, so look at the election code for some of those.
Yes, Deborah, I was actually just going to mention that exact same thing. With some of the changes in procedures and policies, there is rules against obviously partisan gerrymandering. So make sure that that is taken into consideration. But yes, our office does have voter data available for purchase, and it can be requested after submitting a form on our website. All right, and I think actually that was our last question. Again, thank you all for joining us in this 2-week series of our Technical Redistricting Academy. with the Registrar of Voters office. Please visit ocvote.com/academy for any recordings and slides. Session 2 is not up on the website just yet, but it will be made available soon. Again, thank you all for participating, and we hope this was a beneficial session for you. Thank you.